Understanding is Mr. Bradsher issued a subpoena to Agent Whitley and the SBI while we were in court late Friday afternoon regarding the request for production of several documents. Joy Strickland, the attorney with the SBI, is present. I believe she has complied with his requests. The only thing that, or one of the things that kind of comes to my attention that might be something that we need to address outside the presence of the jury is there is some request for documentation as it relates to that Richardson matter. Before we get into that, if that's what, and I don't know if that's what the defendant intends to do or not, but based on everything we've heard and the subpoenas, I would imagine it's something he's at least curious about and might go down that road with. While Ms. Strickland is here, I know some of those things as it relates to that case were under seal, and so and it's on appeal. There becomes a greater issue of what would be able to be talked about, at least without a court order, that we might need to address while she is still present.
All right. Okay. So, Mr. Bradsher.
Yes, Your Honor, I did issue the subpoena, and Ms. Strickland did hand me a packet, and I have no issues with what she's turned over. I certainly do believe part of the cross will deal with policies and procedures with regards to investigations of state employees by different classifications. Whether or not the responses allow me to go further into the specifics of the Richardson matter, I don't know at this time. It is an issue, and I know the state's aware of it because we talked about it pre-trial. But again, I have no objection to what's been tendered to me, and I don't see any problem. And before I get into the specifics of the Richardson investigation, I would certainly alert the court and allow the state to be heard. But I do think tangentially there will be some preliminary questions where that name may be used and the context of the classification of that particular officer, but I would not go into any details until I've laid that foundation and asked the court to go further. And I'm certainly subject to your direction on that. And after we talk about that matter, I just have a couple things to put on the record too, Your Honor.
All right. Well, so it's fine that you'll alert me if you intend to go in the Richardson matter, but you say the name may be used, Richardson name may be used, and without further inquiry of the court. I'm just trying to see the relevance. Well,
yes, Your Honor. I'm trying to comply with that without alerting my cross-examination strategy, other than to say that I believe the timing of the investigation of the Richardson matter, not the judge's ruling and judge's hearing, but in terms of what was going on during the course of Mr. Whitley's investigation with regards to this matter, I believe will have some relevance, as well as how he approaches the investigation of different types of state employees. So it is in that context that I believe the name would be mentioned more chronologically than substantively.
All right. Well, as a general proposition, what goes on in an unrelated investigation has very little relevance to this investigation. And so at this moment, I've listened carefully to any direct examination from this witness and any other witness that relates to policies of the SBI, Kay Perry, or Richardson. I've not heard Richardson's name mentioned. I've heard Kay Perry's name mentioned twice, and I've heard some discussion about policies of the SBI. I'm still skeptical of the relevance of inquiry into unrelated investigations And so I would caution you to alert the court to any reference that you intend to make into those areas, because I don't want to have a trial within a trial.
Yes,
or
sir.
have a issue that lacks relevance but has a significant likelihood of confusing the jury and wasting time, quite frankly, do that. So rather than get into it, I'd rather be alerted to it so that we can address it, make a ruling. You can explain to me the relevance, and if it is relevant, then of course you'll be allowed to proceed. But again, that's where I sit right now, having listened carefully to the testimony so that I could address this issue should it come up.
I will comply with that direction, Your Honor.
Thank you. All right. You said you had a couple other matters you need to bring to my attention.
Yes, Your Honor. I just want to state for the record, the state at the end of the day, Friday, offered 2 stipulations in response to my request for stipulation. One was the state would stipulate as a fact that the Wake County District Attorney's Office made the plea offer to Mr. Blitzer that included the requirement of compliance with the cooperation with the civil case as it's set forth in the transcript. We accept that stipulation. The second stipulation offered was to unredact what has already been introduced to the jury and agree that Judge Stevens' email about him not having any personal knowledge of this matter, that he based his memo completely on representations made by the DA and attorneys in chambers, balancing out both sides of that. I intend to leave well enough alone and not accept that stipulation. And given that I made that decision, I have sent an email to Judge Stevens this morning releasing him from that subpoena. So I believe that issue is resolved.
All right, very good. So what I would say is if there is a stipulation that you wish to present to the court, I'd like it in writing signed by
Yes, sir.
Mr. Latour and Mr. Bradsher.
My understanding of what I said on Friday was that I was not stipulating to that first portion of it, that I would rely on whatever the testimony was in court, because I wasn't in a position to be able to stipulate to anything that I wasn't a party to or aware of.
Well,
And so I don't know where that
here's my
all
view on
goes, but-
stipulations. Until I have something signed in writing, it's not a stipulation. So if you don't agree to it, it's not my business.
Very well.
All right. So talk among yourselves. If there is something you want to present to the court, put it in writing, sign it, and at that point it'll be a stipulation. If you want me to read it to the jury, I will.
Absolutely.
Thank you, Your Honor.
All right. Okay. If there's nothing else, then I believe all jurors are present, so let's go ahead and bring jurors out, please. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back. Hopefully the parking wasn't too much of a problem for you. I know there were some tie-ups earlier this morning, but hopefully by the time you got here it was settled down a bit. I believe we're ready to proceed right where we left off, and that's with the cross-examination of Agent Whitley by Mr. Bradsher. Agent Whitley, do you recognize that you're still under oath, sir?
Yes, sir, I do.
All right, very good. Mr. Bradsher?
Thank you, Your Honor. Good morning.
Good morning.
Agent Whitley. We ended Friday talking about this allegation from April 6th that Tyler Henderson was employed by Craig Blitzer, receiving a paycheck full-time, while the allegation was he was a law student at North Carolina Central University. You recall that?
I recall, but I don't recall the context, if you could remind me.
Okay. May I approach the witness?
Yes, sir.
I'm handing you what's been marked as Defense Exhibit 25. Now, to put it in context, it is true that on April 6th of 2016, Jason Ramey, an ADA with the Rockingham County DA's office, would have sat and met with Agent Mays to make a report of allegations of things he felt were wrongdoing going on with regards to the Rockingham County DA's office?
That is my understanding.
Okay. And you saw Agent Mays testify at the very beginning of this trial what he did from the response of that interview. Is that right?
That's correct.
So looking at Defendant's Exhibit 25, first page, that is a statement that you would have relied on as you proceeded with your investigation after meeting with Judge Crosswhite. Is that correct?
That is information that would be considered, yes.
Okay. So in that context, on Defendant's Exhibit 25, looking at the first page, isn't it true that Jason Ramey had made the allegation?
I'm allowing it simply to describe what this witness did next.
Thank you.
If in fact that's what his recollection is, I don't know.
Yes, Your Honor. Isn't it true that Jason Ramey on this April 6, 2016 had made the allegation that Tyler Henderson was working full-time for Craig Blitzer and receiving a paycheck while being enrolled in North Carolina Central University School of Law?
He did provide information that Tyler was a law student at Central, paid by District Attorney Craig Blitzer.
All right. And in addition, isn't it true the allegation was that Henderson was being paid by the state for not doing the job?
That was the information.
Okay. And fact, in terms of the statement you would have relied on from Agent Hughes, page 1 and 2 of a 3.5-page document is dedicated to that allegation. Is that right? That was happening as of April 6, 2016.
Did you, do you mean Agent Mays?
Yes, Agent
Okay.
May's statement from ADA Ramey.
That is information that would have been considered in the preliminary phase of the investigation.
All right, and the last question we ended on Friday, so we can have context to move in to the next stage. I asked, within 2 days, Agent Mays was able to determine that was not true. Is that right?
He did.
I think the word I used Friday was it was a lie, and you said yes, but I'm going to ask you today, it was not factually true, the allegation that was made. Is that right?
That's correct.
Okay. In fact, what you relied on for this investigation was in part Agent Mays calling the law school to determine Tyler Henderson actually was not enrolled in law school while he was working for Craig Blitzer. Is that true?
That is information that was received in the beginning of the investigation.
Okay. So that was something that ADA Ramey gave to SBI, and the SBI did use resources and investigative time to check that out, and then it was ultimately determined that was not true. Is that right?
Correct.
Okay. So the second part of the allegation of Mr. Ramey on April 6th, isn't it true that it was the issue of Cindy Blitzer receiving a paycheck for not working?
That's correct.
And as a part of that same allegation on April 6th, like the Tyler Henderson allegation, was that she had just started full-time nursing school and was receiving a full-time paycheck without working. Is that right?
I'm not exactly sure about the language used, but in general, yes, she was going to nursing school and receiving a paycheck.
All right. Now, the third part of this April 6th allegation, isn't it true that the allegation was that people in the Rockingham County District Attorney's Office were taking courses for Cindy Blitzer at the Rockingham County DA's office?
That is correct.
All right. So with regards to those three allegations on April 6th, When you get involved, it's July, what?
Mid-July.
Okay. And in mid-July, you're a part of going to see Judge Smith, is that right?
Yes, sir.
He recused himself, is that right?
Yes, sir.
And then how do you get notification that Judge Crosswhite now is going to look at the allegation?
I would have received a telephone call. It could have been from Agent Mays.
Okay.
Um,
And then based on whatever Agent Mays told you, did y'all physically go see Judge Crosswhite?
We waited, during that week, I was expecting a telephone call from Judge Crosswhite. I did not get a telephone call, and I believe that on that Friday, after the meeting with Judge Smith, I went to his office. He wasn't there. I thought I could maybe drop in, just see if I could see him, and he ended up calling me the next day
All right.
on Saturday.
So the interaction with Judge Crosswhite would have been over the phone, is that right?
The initial interaction was, yes.
Okay. Was there a subsequent interaction with Judge Crosswhite after the phone call?
Yes, I had interaction with him both by phone and also in person.
All right. When was the in-person meeting?
I may have made a notation in my notes. I don't recall off the top of my head. It would have been, it seems like I received a call from him maybe the week after we received the requester letter.
Okay.
But other than that, I don't recall what day we would have actually.
Do you recall if it was in August or September? I'm sorry, August or July?
Well, it wouldn't have been in July.
Okay. It would have been in August?
Well, no, it would either have been August or September, probably.
Okay. That's my next question. Is there a piece of paper from Judge Crosswhite in either August or September of 2016 that says the scope of what you're investigating?
He sent a requester letter,
Okay.
and the requester letter would have had some language in it.
All right. And in that letter, which you received in either August or September,
Well, the letter was received, I think the letter was dated August 1st,
okay,
if my memory is correct. And we would have received it sometime after that at headquarters.
all right. And in that letter, the investigation was whether or not Cindy Blitzer was putting in accurate hours in the beacon system for time she worked.
I believe that was part of it.
Okay. And did it include to investigate whether or not her immediate supervisor, Jay Stoltz, who was approving beacon, was that included in the scope?
That was also included.
All right. And within that letter, was there anything else other than a complete investigation of anyone else who may be involved?
I believe that requester letter that we received on August 1st also named you as the overall supervisor, but I don't recall what the specific language was.
All right, but your recollection is that that would have included my name in that original requester letter.
I'm pretty sure it did, yes, sir.
Okay. And then in response to that letter, if you could tell the jury, what did you do next?
I believe I telephoned you around August 10th.
All right. And I wanted to ask you about that. On direct on Friday, you said that you telephoned me. Do you recall, have you had a chance to look at your notes this week?
I did, and I
Okay.
realized now that we spoke again, I telephoned you on the 10th, and you said that you were in a trial and you wouldn't be able to get back with me for a week or so. And ultimately, I believe you didn't call me back, and so then I initiated that second call to you, and you called me back the next day after that.
All right. So August 10th, you call and say I'm in the middle of a trial. Is that right?
August 10th, I called you and you said that you were in a trial or you were
Okay.
going to be in a jury trial.
So I wanted to clear up the issue of calling several times. When you called back later in August, did you leave a voicemail with Ms. Peed?
I very well may have. I don't
Okay.
recall.
All right. In terms of the investigation part of this, what did you do next after you made the phone call to me and I told you I was in a jury trial?
I don't recall exactly what I did next, but I know that the steps in the investigation were that I did an interview with Ms. Tant
Okay.
with AOC.
All right, Ms. Tant, we saw testify here.
Yes,
Got
sir.
AOC records, Beacon, all that. Is that right?
Yes, sir.
So you would have met with her to get information about Cindy Blitzer and who was approving Beacon. Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
All right. And to kind of get us back on track for this Monday, when you called me on January 10th, isn't it true that you said there was a complaint that Ms. Blitzer may not be working all the hours that she's putting in Beacon? Is that right?
That sounds like what I would have said, yes.
Okay. And we at least agree on that date, you wouldn't have said, hey, Mr. Bradsher, you're the index subject of an investigation.
I may not have, especially if you were going into a trial. I may have elected to talk with you about that later.
All right. So after Ms. Tant, then what do you do?
I was contacted by an employee of the district attorney's office in Rockingham. And I don't remember now if I was contacted by Mr. Ramey first or Mr. Morrow, but I ended up interviewing both of those assistant district attorneys prior to your interview.
All right. So before you and I talk on September 6th, you've talked to Ms. Tant, and then you go interview Jason Ramey?
Yes,
And this is the same Jason Ramey that had come April 6th with these three issues that we just talked to the jury about.
that's correct.
And from the testimony on Friday and Agent May's testimony you were here for, you are aware that Jason Ramey had spoke to the SBI before April 6th about the Cindy Blitzer employment and working issue. Is that correct?
No, I don't believe I don't believe that I knew that he spoke with Agent Mays prior to the first interview. Honestly, I just knew that he had been interviewed by Agent Mays.
All right. That's a great answer because we were going chronologically. Let me skip ahead. At some point after there was a motion filed by the defense for extra discovery, you were directed by the Wake County DA's office to look into what had happened about this allegation of Cindy Blitzer getting a paycheck without working prior to April 6th, 2016.
That is correct.
And at that direction, you went and talked with Agent Strader, didn't you?
I did.
And Agent Strader is actually has a wife who is a judge in Rockingham County. Is that right?
That is correct.
And he was an agent with the SBI. Is that right?
That's correct.
And from that investigation, you were able to determine that Jason Ramey spoke with Agent Strader prior to April 6, 2016, weren't you?
That's correct.
All right. And as you did that part of the investigation, in interviewing Agent Strader, were you able to determine when they met?
I don't believe Agent Strader gave me a definite date.
So in terms of facts from the investigation, we do not know when Agent Strader and Jason Ramey met on this issue. Is that right?
I don't believe so.
Just that it was prior to April 6th.
That's correct.
You did some other things such as contacting other SBI agencies that may have been contacted during that time on this issue. Is that right?
That's correct.
And that was a negative result, right?
Yes, sir.
The only report you found about Cindy Blitzer getting a paycheck without working was from Jason Ramey to Agent Strader sometime before April 6th.
I'm sorry, say that again?
Yes. From that investigation as directed by the DA's office on the issue of Cindy Blitzer not working and getting a paycheck. Agent Strader was the only information you found of that being reported to the SBI. Is that right?
That's correct.
Okay. And when you interviewed Craig Blitzer in May of 2017, did he tell you then that he was made aware of an SBI investigation in December of 2015?
I don't know if I recall it from his testimony or from his interview, but I do seem to recall something like that.
All right. Do you recall Craig Blitzer's testimony that he said he related to me in March of 2016 that there was an SBI investigation?
I do.
Okay. And then April 6th, Jason Ramey comes in to see ASAC Mays to make this allegation against Mr. Henderson and Ms. Blitzer and the online courses.
That's correct.
That's the chronology. All right. As a part of your investigation, you subpoenaed records from South, didn't you? The
I
medical.
did.
And you were able to determine the date that Cindy Blitzer started the nursing program, weren't you?
I'm sure that date's included, yes.
Okay. Do you recall what date Cindy Blitzer started the nursing program?
I don't.
Was it April 4th, 2016?
It very well could have been, but we received records that would have also indicated classes prior to the actual nursing program.
Okay.
And I just don't recall the dates that those classes would have started.
In fact, these online courses that we were just talking about, where it was alleged that Rockingham staff were doing courses for or assisting Ms. Blitzer in, were through South, weren't they?
Some of the classes may have actually been through other schools. Phoenix Online, I think, was mentioned. Maybe even Forsyth. I would have to look back at the actual documentation.
Okay. So now you have that source of knowledge, except for the Strader investigation. When you go in, get the letter from Judge Crosswhite and start investigating this. Is that right?
Well, we did not have the records from the school,
Right. Okay.
but we would have had the information from Jason Ramey and the activity that Agent Mays conducted up to that point.
All right. Before I leave that point, I want to ask you this. Since you were here for Agent Mays' testimony, did you hear Agent Mays testify that he actually got assigned this to interview Jason Ramey on April 6th from his supervisor?
I don't really recall that, but that is the way you normally
Okay.
get assigned.
Do you know the name of his supervisor in the Greensboro office?
His supervisor would be Scott Williams.
Okay. So Scott Williams tells him on April 6th to do this investigation. Do you recall that?
Yes, sir.
And the way it's presented in the report that I've handed you up, Defendants 25, Jason Ramey was interviewed at approximately 3:40 p.m. on Wednesday, April 6, 2016. Is that right?
Yes, sir.
The substance of the interview with regards to Cindy Blitzer getting a paycheck without working the hours she was submitting with Agent Strader, we do not have. Is that right?
I'm not aware of any interview or notes that Agent Strader would have generated as a result of that.
When you talked with Jason Ramey on August 29th?
I don't know.
Could you find that? Was it August 29th that you talked with Jason Ramey?
I'm not sure which interview you're referring to.
Well, let me clarify this. You personally talked with Jason Ramey on August 29th, right?
I talked with him several days before we would have done your interview.
Okay.
Yeah.
May I approach the witness, Your Honor?
Yes, sir.
I'll hand you what's been marked as Defense Exhibit 26. So August 29th, now in the chronology, you interviewed Jason Ramey, right?
Yes, sir.
Okay. The other interview with Jason Ramey would have been done by Agent Mays,
That's correct.
the April 6th.
Mhm.
All right. So now you're talking face-to-face with with ADA Ramey, August 29th of 2016, is that right?
That's correct.
What was your purpose for interviewing Mr. Ramey within the investigation as set forth by Judge Crosswhite of whether or not Cindy Blitzer was working all the hours she was getting paid for?
Well, I believe that Mr. Ramey contacted me, or I may have contacted him, I don't recall, but he had information that a coworker of his wanted to provide information regarding the classes that Cindy Blitzer was taking at South University. And to me, that information seemed like something we needed. It was directly related to whether she was going to school instead of working. I felt like he needed to be interviewed.
All right. You knew from looking at Agent May's April 6th interview, there was this allegation that Cindy Blitzer was having Rockingham staff take courses for her, right?
I knew from the information Agent Mays provided me early on in the investigation that there were multiple complaints by Mr. Ramey. And I believe that that was one of the complaints, but I was very new to the investigation at that point, and honestly, I don't remember which ones I retained and which ones I did not.
Well, now referring to Defendants 26, you have written up the substance of your interview in a typed statement from Jason Ramey on August 29, 2016. Is that right?
That's correct.
And let me ask you, since you brought the regs, what would this be considered? You said some words like 11A and things like that on Friday. What would this be?
It's the report is called an 11A. It's just the number that they give to it, SBI 11A, but it's an interview.
All right. Now, in that interview, isn't it true that you have documented that Jason Ramey related?
Objection.
I'm offering it only to show why he did what he did next, Your Honor, not for the truth of the matter asserted.
Well, you can. I think you can ask that in a way that does not recount the statement of an unsworn declarant who's not present in court.
Yes, Your Honor, I'll rephrase. In your interview with Mr. Ramey, isn't it true that one of the subjects that was brought up was, again, Tyler Henderson?
That is correct.
All right. In your statement, August 29th, after the interview with Mr. Ramey, you did put a little background information for Mr. Ramey, didn't you?
I'm sorry, say that one more time and tell me what part you're referring to.
All right. The bottom of page 1, did you recount in your statement background information with regards to Jason Ramey.
That's correct.
All right? And the first part of your statement, top of page 2, was the subject of your discussion Cindy Blitzer's position and whether she was working the hours that she was putting in Beacon?
The top of page 2?
Yes, second paragraph. Is that what was the subject of the discussion with ADA Ramey?
That's correct.
And as you go down into the second part, is the subject that your discussion is the employment of Ms. Blitzer?
It does discuss the employment of Ms. Blitzer.
Okay. And then it discusses the employment of Pam Bradsher with Rockingham County Office, doesn't it?
It does.
All right. And then by the top of page 3, it shifts to Tyler Henderson, doesn't it?
It does.
Okay. And during this interview that you did with Mr. Ramey, was the same allegation made in April 6th made that Tyler Henderson was...
Objection. Goes to the statement that was made.
I'm going to allow it, whether there was an allegation made about Tyler Henderson that was essentially the same as the one that had been previously made. I'd allow that statement. You can ask it in a more artful fashion than I just did.
I will try, Your Honor. Thank you. Top of page 3, with regards to this interview with ADA Ramey on August 29, 2016, was the same allegation made that Tyler Henderson was full-time for Craig Blitzer but attending law school and getting a paycheck?
I don't believe that's exactly what it discusses.
All right.
It does discuss him, though.
All right. And specifically from that discussion of him, you were first introduced to this word of sharing talent.
Objection.
Overruled.
It is included in his language, yes.
All right. So as of August 29, 2016, in terms of, in your mind, proceeding with the investigation, you now had information linking the idea of Tyler Henderson as being part of a talent sharing program, right?
Objection. That's not what he testified to.
I'll allow him to answer. You may answer.
I can tell you that by that date, August 29th, I had heard that term, and I heard that term from him.
From Jason Ramey.
Yes, sir,
All right.
on that date during that interview.
All right. And then next, on page 3, continuing on, he further discusses Henderson and his employment working hours.
Let's see. He does.
All right. And at this point in the investigation, August 29th, had you ever met Melinda Richardson?
Unless I met her on an unrelated investigation where I went to that office for some other investigation.
Okay. And isn't it true Melinda Richardson was the AA administrative assistant in Rockingham County District Attorney's Office?
Yes, sir.
In fact, Ms. Pete has testified here earlier. She was the administrative assistant in District 9A DA's office.
Yes, sir.
All right. So it's same role in
Yes,
each
sir.
county. Okay. And as a part of this August 29th interview, you were also given information about Melinda Richardson's activities with regards to Mr. Henderson.
Yes, sir.
All right. Then looking at page 4, this is all in an interview on August 29th, 2016. Can you tell the jury where this was happening?
This interview took place in the parking lot of the Four Seasons Mall, which is in Greensboro, North Carolina.
Okay. And that it would have started around 3:13 p.m., is that right?
Yes, sir.
All right. And then as you continue to interview Jason Ramey, isn't it true that the subject matter that is covered for another page are these different online courses that other employees of Rockingham DA office would be taking for Cindy Blitzer?
That's correct.
And then, does the issue shift to Mr. Blitzer in BLET?
Where are you looking, Mr.
All right.
Bradsher?
I will withdraw that question. Let me ask another question. Bottom page 4. Does the issue discuss, as a part of your interview with Mr. Ramey, talk about BLET?
Yes, sir.
All right. And then is there, as a part of your interview, the issue of whether or not there is an employee, Ambrose, that's employed by the Rockingham office?
Yes, sir.
And is there documented in your report about Ambrose taking classes for Miss Blitzer in Rockingham?
Yes, sir.
All right. So this continues on to 5 and a little piece of a page 6 that you typed up in an interview. Is that right?
That's correct.
All right. At the conclusion of that interview, isn't it true that you indicated that the person you were interviewing couldn't think of any further information to provide?
That's true.
All right. During the conversation that we've talked about on Defense Exhibit 26 now, is there a reference that there was a phone call to Mr. Ramey a few days earlier? Or from Ramey? To or from?
By who?
Did you and Mr. Ramey speak by phone prior to this interview on August 29th?
We would have had to speak by phone to set up the interview, but I don't recall really how that came about.
All right, if you could look at page 5, the second paragraph.
Yes, sir.
All right. As a part of the interview on August 29th with Mr. Ramey, do you note that you had had a telephone conversation with Jason Ramey?
Yes, sir.
Do you know what day you had that phone conversation with Mr. Ramey?
I don't, but it appears that it was probably prior to August 25th or on August 25th.
Do you recall, without saying exactly what Mr. Ramey said, the nature of the phone call you had with Jason Ramey prior to August 25th?
I don't recall specifically, no,
Okay.
other than it would have been to set up this interview.
But in the interview, there is an issue that's linked to that the phone call was before August 25th and 26th, what you learned from the investigation is when some computers were removed from Rockingham County. Is that right?
That is information that ADA Ramey provided to me, yes.
All right, that computers were removed August 25th and 26th. Is that right?
Sustained.
All right. Let me ask you this. Once you're aware of the issue that computers had been removed, that you deduced was after a phone call you and Mr. Ramey had, did you go investigate that?
No.
Okay. So as to the specifics of those two computers being removed, August 25th, 26th, you have no independent knowledge from any investigation. Is that right?
No, and I don't know the circumstances surrounding it.
Okay. But it was noted in your report as something that was characterized as strange. Is that right?
Sustained.
Okay, I'll move on from that. So you took notes from this interview just like you described to the jury on Friday. You took notes with my interview. Is that right?
Yes, sir.
Okay. And then on the same day, you would have also interviewed Spencer Morrow. Isn't that right?
That's correct.
Okay. And that would have started at 5:25 p.m. on August 29th, 2016.
I'm not sure. I'm not sure without having the interview in front of me.
Do you believe, before I leave Jason Ramey, do you believe you would have noted anything about the substance of the phone call of Mr. Ramey prior to August 29th? Is that documented anywhere what y'all would have talked about?
No, sir. If it was a phone call from Mr. Ramey saying, "Hey, I have information. I'd like to provide it," and we set up a time for him to be interviewed, it would probably be documented in my notes that he called me, but we would document that information that Mr. Ramey provides when we actually meet face to face.
All right. So for the jury then, this was a scheduled appointment meeting at the Four Seasons parking lot, August 29th at 3:13 p.m.
Yes, sir.
with Jason Ramey. And there was a scheduled meeting with Spencer Morrow on August 29th, 2016, sometime around 5:25.
I remember it being on the same day, yes.
Okay. May I approach the witness, Your Honor?
Yes.
May we both approach, Your Honor?
Yes.
May I approach the witness? Your Honor?
Yes, please.
Mandy now has been marked as defendant's exhibit 27. Agent Whitley, if you had a second to look at that,
Yes, sir.
do you recognize that as a statement that you would have typed up from an interview with Thomas Spencer Morrow?
Yes, sir.
And would that interview have been done on August 29th, 2016?
Yes, sir.
And would it have begun around 5:25 p.m.?
Yes, sir.
And as you've indicated before, this was a scheduled meeting, is that right?
Yes, sir.
And you met and interviewed with Mr. Morrow for a little over an hour, is that right?
Yes, sir.
All right. And generally, would you have taken down background information from Mr. Morrow?
Yes, sir.
Okay. You would have generally known his position in the Rockingham County DA's office?
Yes, sir.
All right. And generally, what was the discussion with Mr. Morrow about topic-wise?
His specific concerns involved his taking online course for Cindy Blitzer. And then it also concerned Cindy Blitzer's employment status.
Okay. And generally, you discussed, did you have a discussion about the specifics of him doing what you just said, taking classes for Cindy Blitzer?
Our discussion did revolve around that.
All right. And did you also discuss generally the actions of Craig Blitzer with regards to online classes for Cindy Blitzer?
Yes, sir.
All right. And in general, did you talk about where that would occur and what type of computers that would be on?
Objection.
Overruled.
One second, sir. Yes, sir, we did.
All right. And then also generally, was a subject covered about BLET and who was attending that?
Yes, sir.
All right. Now, these two interviews, you would have done note-taking just like you described that you did in my interview, is that right?
I would have written down information that they provided to me, yes, and typed up my notes from those, typed up my notes from those written interviews.
All right. And all of this is still under the original letter from Judge Crosswhite of the investigating whether Cindy Blitzer was working the hours that she was putting in Beacon. Is that right?
That is correct.
Okay. Now, did you do any other interviews between these two and the September 6th interview with me?
I don't believe so.
All right. May I approach the witness, Your Honor?
Yes, sir.
Agent Whitley, I'm handing what's been marked as Defense Exhibit 28. Can you tell the jury what Defense Exhibit 28 is?
This is a copy of the notes that correspond to Mr. Bradsher's interview that was done on September 6th.
All right. Now, one of the things that we talked about on Friday was this issue of AOC approval, for example. You remember us talking about that on Friday?
Yes, sir.
Okay, and if you could turn to your notes on Defense Exhibit 28, see if you can find the notation where you write down the AOC approval.
Mr. Bradsher, I'll continue to look, but I'm not finding that.
All right, let me do it this way. You've had a chance to look at every page of the notes on Defendant's Exhibit 28, is that right?
Yes, sir.
And those are your notes, is that right?
They are.
Would you agree that is the complete notes you would have taken from the hour and 20 minutes that we sat together and talked in my office on September 6, 2016?
This would have been generated either during your interview or after. Yes.
All right. With that, if the state has no objection, I'll go ahead and move it into evidence.
Any objection?
I would want to look again at the document that he's provided.
May I approach the witness?
Yes, sir.
Your Honor, while I was doing that, is it permissible to pour water?
Yes, sir.
during session?
Yes, sir.
Didn't know what the local rules were. Okay, now looking at Appendix Exhibit 28. In fact, let me do it this way. As you go through Defendant's Exhibit 28, I'd ask the record to reflect, I'm asking the witness to mark Defendant's Exhibit 28 with the black Sharpie with page numbers starting at 1 in succession. As you recall, they would have been taken. So in looking at page 1, could you mark page 1?
Mr. Bradsher, I'm not sure I can tell you which pages are in which sequence, especially in the beginning of the interview.
All right, we'll come back to that in a minute. Let me stay with the AOC question.
All
In
right.
looking at Defendant's Exhibit 28, do you see a notation in the left-hand margin?
Oh, yes, sir.
All right. On the left-hand margin, if you could read for the jury what you wrote in your handwriting.
Cleared by AOC, not sure when, would try to get documentation.
All right. Now look right to the right. What is the paragraph that you wrote that beside?
I originally hired my wife for VWLA, initially then moved to investigation slot. Wife started January 11, then went into investigator position January of 15. Wife named Pam Bradsher.
Okay. And right beside that to the left says that AOC approved that. Is that right?
Yes, sir.
Okay. And you do recall from the interview that I indicated to you that we had asked if I could hire my wife, didn't I?
Yes, sir.
All right. You recall us discussing the conditions in which she moved into the investigator slot?
In general, not really. I mean,
Okay, don't recall. And beside that, you wrote that there was AOC approval. Is that right?
yes, sir.
Now let's get to numbering the pages real quick before we get back into the notes. If you could flip back to the front, and I need to ask you, do you recognize the first page of Defense Exhibit 28 as the first page of your notes?
Yes, sir.
All right, if you could mark that, the lower left-hand corner with a 1.
Did you say lower left?
Yes, please.
Okay.
And then can you read and follow through to page 2 and confirm that that would have been the second page of your notes?
Mr. Bradsher, these pages could have been shuffled as I was dictating them, typing them into the 11A. I can't say with any certainty which one is 2, which one is 3.
Okay. The second page in that grouping of Defendants 28, what is that about?
I've got that you ran for District Attorney's Office in 2010, won the election, took office 2011.
All right, so background information.
It is.
All right, and then does it proceed to a list of the organization?
Yes, sir.
All right,
Which is also on the next page.
okay. Now, with regards to the testimony Friday about the issue of Bradsher stated he would attempt to gather documentation of work projects that Cindy Blitzer did at his direction. All right, let's just start with that. Can you go through the notes for a minute and see? That's at the very end of the type statement, but could you look and see where that is in the notes?
Mr. Bradsher, I can look through this, but whether it's written there or not, that was part of our interview. At one point, you referenced that you knew what Cindy had done for you. That's the closest thing I can find to it.
Okay. Now, also, from your statement, you indicated that Bradsher State employees he believed might have possibly had contact with or worked with Cindy Blitzer were Holly McAdams, Stoltz, Hugh Williford, Elisa Black, Gail Peed, and Debbie Holbrook. You recall testifying to that?
Yes, sir.
And in looking at the notes, that's not set out as a narrative, like you're writing and you said, I asked him such and this is what he told me. Is that right?
That's correct.
Is it fair to say that what you would have done is gone back to the notes you'd already taken and then circled people and made a notation? Possibly worked with, possibly had contact with, things like that.
It could have happened that way, or it could have been that I did that while we were talking. I don't recall.
All right. So look back. For example, the first name you gave was Holly McAdams. In your note taking, what note would you have, did you circle Holly McAdams' name?
I didn't circle it, but I put an asterisk beside it.
Okay. Any notation about possibly had contact with or worked with?
I did write may have worked with her.
Okay. And when you interviewed Ms. McAdams, you were able to confirm contact, weren't you?
Yes, contact.
All right. And Stoltz was the second name. What did you do with Stoltz in the notes?
Well, his name's mentioned a couple times. Beside his name, I put an asterisk, and then also towards the end, you said that you did not know what he may have done for her.
Okay. Because he was the supervisor and...
Yes, sir.
Okay. And he approved the beacon. That's noted in the substance of your notes, isn't it?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Hugh Williford was listed. Did you circle his name and make some notation by it?
Yeah. Yes, sir, I did.
And you interviewed him, didn't you?
Yes, sir.
And from that interview, you were able to determine he had contact and worked with Cindy Blitzer. Isn't that right?
Yes, sir.
All right. And then Elisa Black is listed, but we discussed that Friday. She was not interviewed. Is that right?
That's correct.
And then Gail Peed is listed. Is that right?
Yes, sir.
Okay. And you interviewed her?
Yes, sir.
And she did have contact with Cindy Blitzer.
Yes, sir.
And you interviewed Debbie Holbrook.
Yes, sir.
All right. And in the interview, she indicated she not only had contact, but worked with Cindy Blitzer. Isn't that right?
Yes, sir. In the beginning, she did.
All right. So of the names given, from the notes that you wrote down and the notes you made, that was consistent with what you put in your notes and with what was put in the statement, right?
Yes, sir. That was transferred to the typed statement.
Now, you do note at the very end of the notes, you put about Charity Loftus being in an ADA position.
Yes, sir.
All right. And the prosecutor asked you, did she have any contact with Cindy Blitzer or work with her? You remember that?
I did.
All right. And you recall the response that you wrote it down because I brought it up, but it had no context, did it? As to why I brought it up? Or an explanation to you about it being brought up?
I don't recall it being said that way, but you told me that those were the people that, may have had contact with Cindy Blitzer.
Okay. Do you recall from the interview us discussing about an investigator's role
An investigator's role.
or job description?
Oh, yes. Yes, sir.
You you brought that up and asked about Cindy Blitzer's duties. Isn't that right?
Yes, sir.
All right. And isn't it true that you were told she was supposed to do conflict cases, liaison, overflow work for Rockingham, special projects, and the Shockley case?
Yes, sir.
All right. You came with a description of the DA investigator given to you by AOC. Isn't that right?
Seems like I had written down on a sticky note what I thought an investigator may do.
Okay.
Yes.
And did that come from some form from AOC?
No, I think I don't believe I received that from some form.
All right. Prior to our interview, did you go look at the statute on a description of district attorney investigator?
I don't believe so.
Okay. Well, at any point in the investigation, did you learn that the statute sets forth what an investigator does?
I don't believe so, no.
Okay. So in terms of what the statute says an investigator does, that was not part of your investigation?
The closest thing to getting a description of the investigator was, I believe we received an investigator's job position description, job description. I may have received that from Debbie Tant.
Okay. Isn't it true that the statute indicates that they do preparation of matters for trial and any other duty the district attorney assigns?
Objection. He's testified he's not aware of the statute.
It's sustained as to what the statute says.
All right. So in terms of...
If I may, it seems like I may have looked up the statute when later in the investigation when we were doing court orders. I may have used that as a basis to ask what to request, but I'm not totally sure.
All right. Back to Charity Loftus. I want to ask you, isn't it true that in the discussion of Charity Loftus, we talked about how different positions characterized were used in different ways by different district attorneys' offices?
I don't remember that discussion, Mr. Bradsher.
Okay. Well, as a part of your investigation, did you investigate whether or not, in fact, elected DAs were using victim witness legal assistant slots after the cuts from the legislature to put actual attorneys in that were working as ADAs?
Objection.
Sustain said he didn't remember a conversation about that, and again, you'll be given an opportunity to testify if you choose to. So I'm going to sustain the objection as hearsay. If you want to try to refresh his memory, you can do that. But
all right. Do you recall any other context of Charity Loftus being mentioned with regards to her being in an ADA slot? I'll stop right there with the question.
I don't really recall that. I know that you did talk a lot about positions and a lot of things that I considered outside of the scope of what I needed to get to, which was whether Ms. Blitzer was working or not.
All right. And so none of the discussion in terms of the interview with me was about Cindy Blitzer getting Rockingham employees to take classes for her, was it?
No, sir.
All right. So you had had two previous interviews on August 29th that covered that subject, is that right?
That's correct.
And you came in to interview me, and you did not say anything to me about that. Is that
I did
right?
not disclose that information to
All
you,
right.
no.
And since we're transitioning from Friday to Monday, also did not say you were there pursuant to a judge's investigation. Is that right?
I would think that we would have talked about that. We definitely talked about the fact that this was a complaint that Cindy Blitzer wasn't working. I would think that we would have discussed how the investigation was going to proceed. Since you are a district attorney and you know how these things work, I would think that that would be something we talked about.
Okay. But to clarify, you don't recall telling me that. That's fair, isn't it?
That is fair.
And it is not reflected in the notes. Is that right?
It is not reflected in my notes.
All right.
But I'm almost sure we would have talked about it because I told you that I needed to interview your staff. And you would have known it was a criminal investigation. And as a matter of fact, I started the interviews right after your interview.
All right. I want to follow up on that. You said I would have known it was a criminal investigation. All right.
From me.
From you. Something that you would have told me was a criminal investigation, right?
Well, I don't know whether I specifically said the word criminal,
Okay.
but I don't see how you could take it any other way.
All right. Let's get to that. You used the terminology indexed subject. All right. All right. If you could describe for the jury, what is that?
When we start an investigation, we open the case on what's called a green sheet. And when we open the green sheet, we have to index someone as a subject of the case. I recall initially I indexed Cindy Blitzer in this case as a subject. Or I could have indexed her as a suspect. It's the same thing, it's just a different block. And I do recall that at some point my supervisor told me to index additional people.
I'm sorry. My supervisor told me.
To index additional subjects set forth by Judge Crosswhite's letter.
All right. So with regards to Judge Crosswhite's authorized investigation that you've described for the jury, do you have that letter?
Not with me.
Okay. But you believe that not only Cindy Blitzer and Jay Stoltz is listed in that letter, but that I am listed in that letter?
I seem to recall language that either named you or said something like Mr. Stoltz's supervisor.
All right. So with regards to Judge Crosswhite's authorization, when would the indexing have occurred?
Well, like I said, I initially indexed Cindy Blitzer, and at some point I was reminded to index you and Mr. Stoltz.
All right. Do you know when that occurred?
I don't.
All right. May I approach the witness, Your Honor?
Yes.
Very briefly, because I'm trying to keep it in order. And then I'll go to that. May I approach?
Yes, sir.
First, a little off topic, but to stay in order, Haney Westwood Martin, Exhibit 29. Take a moment, look at that, and see if that is your typed statement of my interview.
Yes, sir, it is.
Okay. Move defendants 29 to evidence as well, Your Honor.
Any objection?
No, Your Honor.
It's allowed.
Now, back to indexing. Haney Westwood marked as defendants Exhibit 30. You recognize defendants 30?
Yes, sir. This is the case opener report.
All right. You do this on a computer in Hickory?
Well, I'm not sure where I did it, but I do it on a computer.
All right. And this particular document, do you recognize it as a case identification report?
Yes, sir.
All right. And does it have the indexing that you've referenced to the jury?
It does. It has Cindy Blitzer indexed at the time the case was opened, which was August 3rd. And it's got Mr. Stoltz and Mr. Bradsher indexed. I believe the date would have been September 21st.
All right. So the indexing on this report dated 9/21/2016 has a synopsis and then has 3 people as index subjects. Is that right?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Was this generated September 21st, 2016, or is there a case ID report with indexing that has an earlier date than this?
Well, I believe it would all be the same report, just I'm not sure, Mr. Bradsher. I don't know how they do it.
Okay. Well, let me ask you this. Normally, because the prosecutor asked this earlier, normally when you go into a district attorney's office and there is an investigation where they're not the indexed subject, okay, you would go in and talk to them about the issue. Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
All right. And the SBI does have original jurisdiction in North Carolina for property crimes involving state of North Carolina monies, don't they?
That is correct.
Okay. And so normally, not this case, just in general, you would go in and speak with district attorney and lay out what the issue is and what you're going to do. Is that right?
Yes, sir. I believe that's what we did.
Okay. You would have a different approach if you went in to see a district attorney and said, you are an index subject of this investigation, wouldn't you?
The information would generally be the same. The indexing at that point in the investigation was, I don't want to say a formality, it's a very serious issue, but we had no knowledge of the actual level of involvement of you or Mr. Stoltz. So I'm not sure we would have really treated it differently.
Okay. So even though I was an index subject, you would have approached it the same way you did with any other district attorney?
I'm not sure how to answer that question. I
Okay.
mean, I would have went to you and told you the situation and tried to figure out what the situation was.
All right. With regards to Defendants 30, a document generated on September 21st, 2016, can you explain to the jury that date as it relates to the investigation beginning August 3rd, 2016?
Well, I could be wrong on this because I'm not sure about the way our system really works, but I believe that the case number would have been generated and this report would have been generated on the 3rd. And I think going into it and adding these additional names would have been done on September 21st, and maybe that's why it's documenting that date, but I'm not exactly sure.
All right. So just to clarify, it's 11 o'clock. Isn't it true that when you initially entered this case ID report after getting the letter from Judge Crosswhite, as of August 3rd, you indexed Cindy Blitzer as the subject of the investigation? Is that true?
That's correct.
And is it also true, based on your last answer, that the other 2 index subjects would have been added at a later date?
Yes, sir. I'm pretty sure they were added at a later date.
All right. And since that date of 9/21/2016 appears on the right-hand corner, do you have any personal knowledge as to whether September 21st, 2016 was in fact the time when, let's start with J. Stoltz, was added as an indexed subject?
I think that that's correct, but I'm not sure. That's my best guess.
All right. And then after Mr. Stoltz's name, my name appears as an index subject with regards to this investigation of Cindy Blitzer not working the hours. Is that right?
That's correct.
As of September 21st, you would have already interviewed me, right?
That's correct.
And isn't it true, you wouldn't have come in and said you're the index subject of an investigation on September 6th if that didn't happen until September 21st, would you?
Not really, because in my mind, I knew that I had to index both the person who was approving Ms. Blitzer's hours and also Mr. Bradsher for any exposure he might have since he's the overall supervisor. There's a difference between what I know I have to do and then the paperwork. As long as we get it in the paperwork, it's fine. I just don't remember when I put that in the paperwork. My
All right.
best guess is September 21st.
To add context, do you recall, we've already talked about talking to Jason Ramey by phone and then a written statement August 29th, and Spencer Morrow interview August 29th, and you've talked with Debbie Tant, isn't that right? And then you talked to me on September 6th. Were there any other interviews with regards to Defendant's Exhibit 30 investigation prior to my interview?
Okay, say that one more time.
Okay. Prior to September 6th, after getting authorization from Judge Crosswhite on August 3rd, did you talk to anyone other than Debbie Tant, Spencer Morrow, Jason Ramey, with regards to this investigation before you talked to me?
I believe that's all I can recall. If those are the names that are in the case file prior to your interview, then yes.
And then after speaking with me on that same day, September 6th, you met with Gail Peed, is that right?
I would have to look at her interview.
If you could look at first your notes, Defense Exhibit 28, I believe. Do you see a notation on your notes on Defense Exhibit 28
Oh,
about?
I apologize. You're right. I spoke with you said Miss Peed?
Right.
I did speak with her after you.
Okay. And if you will look at your notes, can you tell the jury what you noted beside Miss Peed's name on Defense Exhibit 28?
Approves employees.
Okay. Any reference on the notes about when you were planning to interview her?
I don't believe
How
so.
about on the first page?
I don't believe so.
Okay. Based on your recollection, do you believe you had planned to interview Ms. Peed that same day anyway?
Yes, sir. I did have that plan.
All right. As the prosecutor asked you Friday, that investigative path, right? You remember testifying to that?
Yes, sir.
Laying out that investigative path from the beginning and following that path during the course of your investigation. Is that right?
Yes, sir.
So after receiving Judge Crosswhite's direction on this specific investigation, you had a path to go to Ms. Tant, right?
Miss Peed or Miss Tant?
Ms. Tant,
Okay.
isn't that right?
I'm sorry. I thought that I interviewed your administrative assistant after your interview, Miss Peed.
On the 6th. But
Yes, sir.
you set your investigative path August 3rd, right?
Yes, sir. I did
Okay.
interview Miss Tant before you. Yes.
And Jason Ramey, right?
Yes, sir.
And Spencer Mara.
Yes, sir.
Then me.
Yes, sir.
Then Miss Page.
Hmm.
And Miss Luann Martin in my office.
Yes, sir.
And Miss Holly McAdams. Isn't that right?
Yes, sir.
And we agree, isn't it true, that on that day, September 6th, you already had baseline information about Tyler Henderson and the talent sharing relationship with Rockingham from these previous interviews, right?
Yes, sir.
But you chose not to interview Tyler Henderson that day, September 6th, right?
That's correct.
The prosecutor asked you, in trying to explain that, well, that wasn't one of the people that Mr. Bradsher listed as somebody who had worked with Ms. Blitzer. You remember that question?
I believe so, yes.
And you remember from Friday, I said, didn't I disclose to you about the Shockley file and Ms. Blitzer working on that and Mr. Henderson? And you said yes, right?
Yes.
Okay. But the truth is, that was not part of the investigative path to interview Tyler Henderson in this investigation at this point, right?
That's correct.
It wasn't, as it's been previously explained to this jury, that, oh, he was just somebody not listed as working with him. It was a deliberate decision on that day not to interview Tyler Henderson.
No, it was directly related to the fact that if Mr. Henderson works in one county and you're saying that Ms. Blitzer works in 3 counties over, they're not going to work together.
And at this point, you have all of these notes from these interviews. You've already told the jury you don't recall when mine were typed up. Do you recall when all these notes from these interviews were reduced to a typed statement?
I don't.
Is there anything within the SBI system that allows that to be figured out?
There is, and I actually checked it over the weekend because I was curious about your interview, and I believe that it noted that Records Center received it the next day.
On September 7th?
Yeah, it's the day after your interview.
So there is a record of everyone's statements
Yes, sir.
with regards to when they were typed up in relationship to the notes taken.
Yes, sir.
And is that something that is held in the normal course of business with the State Bureau of Investigation?
It is.
And is it generated when the report is made?
No, sir. It's. I'm not sure how it's generated, but I'm sure that they could get to it if you need it.
All right. It's certainly within the possession of the State Bureau of Investigation.
Yes,
right?
sir.
So as to every interview taken, from the notes to typed statement, there is a record of when it was actually typed.
That's correct.
Do you recall if you ever turned that over to the state?
I've always been told that that's part of the quality control, and as such, it's not discoverable. I'm sure that, if you wanted to reach out with some sort of paperwork, you could get it.
So you have been told per SBI policy that that is not discoverable. Is that right?
I've been told in general that things dealing with quality control are not discoverable.
All right.
And to me, it would seem like that would be quality control.
You have looked at your notes and also looked at the statement that's been typed from the notes, haven't you?
For which interview?
For my interview.
Yes, sir.
All right. And they are now in evidence, correct?
Yes, sir.
All right. Now, when you go in, as you indicated, to do an investigation with regards to a state employee, you also trained as to the rights of that state employee under investigation, aren't you?
No, sir. I don't know any separate way that we would initially approach the state employee.
All right. Well, let me ask it this way. In response to a question, you said you would have known it was a criminal investigation. Does the SBI do criminal and administrative investigations?
They do.
All right. If you could describe to the jury the difference between those two types of investigations.
A criminal investigation is conducted by a member of law enforcement, usually with a citizen. An administrative investigation is an internal investigation. It's conducted by the law enforcement agency to determine whether one of their employees committed some act contrary to policy, procedure, law, etc.
So with regards to administrative investigations, they are in the context of internal investigations within law enforcement agencies. Is that right?
Yes, in general.
All right. But yet the SBI conducts the investigation of that person or persons in that law enforcement agency. Is that right?
Well, no, the SBI would conduct the investigation of their own person. They could not go to Raleigh Police Department and initiate an administrative investigation on someone that works outside of the SBI.
Well, I think I'm at the point, Your Honor, where I need to comply with the order and be heard.
All right. Okay, so ladies and gentlemen, we're going to take a recess. We'll go ahead and resume at 11:30. Please recall all the instructions I gave you last week. Don't talk about this case among yourselves or with anyone else. Don't form or express opinions about the outcome. No media or independent investigation into these matters. And no conversations with parties, witnesses, or lawyers. Leave your notepads in your chairs and gather in the deliberation room at 11:30. Everyone else, please remain seated. Presence of the jury, Mr. Bradsher, you wish to be heard?
That or at some point, we're just going to ask a few voir dire questions. I was getting ready to ask about, in response to the last question about the SBI would not go into other law enforcement agencies. And the question I had after that was, what about the ALE as being a separate law enforcement agency? And have they not conducted investigations within the ALE?
Well, why don't you do that on voir dire? Why don't you ask that question to
right,
get
thank you.
clarity on this issue?
All right. In response to my last question, you talked about the SBI does not go and do investigations within another law enforcement agency.
Yes, sir.
All right. So the first question would be, so if another agency requested you to come in, for example, Durham Police Department, under a judge's direction, could you go investigate a member of the Durham Police Department?
I've never heard of that. There may be a mechanism. I'm not aware of it.
And with regards to ALE, have you conducted investigations within the ALE department?
I have conducted investigations within the ALE branch, which it's my understanding is part of the SBI.
All right. And you recently had a court hearing about that, is that right?
Yes, sir.
Okay. And there was an issue raised about whether or not there was compliance with ALE regulations versus SBI regulations. Is
Yes,
that
sir.
right?
I recall that.
All right. So it would be your response then that ALE was part of the SBI when you conducted that investigation?
I think my response to them was that I was following SBI policy and procedure, and I may have been asked, did I follow ALE policy and procedure? And I believe I indicated I followed SBI policy and procedure.
Yes, and I'm sorry, I didn't mean to get to the specifics of that case. I was asking generally. At the time you conducted the investigation of the ALE agent that you've referred to, that investigation, you contend that the ALE was part of the SBI, is that right?
That was my understanding.
Okay. And not a separate law enforcement entity with its own policies and procedures for internal investigation?
It's my understanding that there is language both that the SBI director appoints and has, I don't know the exact language, but basically has jurisdiction over all employees of ALE. and also language that they are a separate and discrete agency. And quite honestly, I don't know.
Okay, last question for voir dire, Your Honor, is in that particular Ray Richardson case, there was an issue about following the procedures and policies as it relates to the investigation of an ALE officer under ALE policy and guidelines. Isn't that right?
There was, yes.
Okay. And the issue, one of the issues in that case was that SBI policies and procedures were followed instead of the ALE policy and procedures
For whom?
for the investigation of Ray Richardson.
Yes, for the investigation, yes.
Okay. And to clarify for the record, His Honor is going to rule, the finding was that the correct policies and procedures were not followed. Is that right?
Honestly, I'm not exactly sure
Okay.
what was ruled. I was sequestered for that, and I have only recently heard about this, mostly because of this forum, and haven't really had a chance to research it.
And are there any specific policies and procedures with regards to investigating employees of constitutional officers in the state?
I'm not sure.
Okay. That's it for the voir dire, Your Honor.
All right, and so the question is whether you'd be permitted to go into that line of inquiry with this jury?
To lay out, based on the last response of they're not allowed to go into other agencies, my plan was to first start the example of Durham Police Department, where he's indicated he's not aware of that procedure, and follow that sequence of questions to clarify, and end with whether or not there are policies and procedures for the investigation of a department headed by a constitutional officer.
And how is it relevant that in this case, whether the ALE is part of the SBI or not part of the SBI, and this issue of whether the SBI has investigative authority through its administrative authority over the ALE, how is that relevant?
Yes, Your Honor. A few of the questions I asked would not be relevant getting into the specifics of that investigation. Showing the different agencies and the different policies and procedures and the difference between an administrative and a criminal investigation, I think is relevant to give context, especially given the testimony, Your Honor, that this agent appeared to a district attorney's office speaking with the elected DA, and I contend the fact is still at issue whether or not he disclosed that the elected DA that has certain authority within that district was the subject of the investigation, or whether or not he was conducting an investigation into this individual that was a part of this office. And I'd like to clarify for the jury that this agent is not aware of any policies or procedures that govern how he approaches the investigation of that employee.
All right, I think the testimony is clear that there is such a thing as an administrative investigation, but that is limited to the investigation of SBI employees or entities associated with the SBI. Your office is neither of those. I think it's also clear, and so I don't think that at this moment there's any confusion as to the fact that he did not consider this an administrative investigation, and the other type of investigation that he's testified to is that there are criminal investigations, and I believe his testimony is that this was a criminal investigation. Now, I think you've already asked whether there are any policies relating to the investigation of state employees, and he has said that he is not aware of that. If you wish to ask whether there are policies relating to the investigation of constitutional officers in other state agencies, you can ask that.
Thank you, Your Honor.
But I'm going to sustain the objection that was previously made to the inquiry of an administrative investigation into the ALE and the details, any details relating to that at this time.
Thank you very much, Your Honor.
Thank you. All right. We'll be in recess. We'll go ahead and take 15 minutes, and we'll resume at 25 minutes till.
We'll close the recess until 25 minutes.